As the days passed, I noticed subtle changes in Michael's behavior, my adopted son. Ever since his return from university, he had an air about him that I couldn't quite place, an awareness that seemed deeper, more searching than before. It wasn't uncommon for family dynamics to shift as children grew, but this felt different, more pronounced. The first time I caught him looking, I was in the kitchen, focused on a simple task. Cutting vegetables, minding the stove, feeling the soft rhythm of daily life around me. I could feel his presence before I even saw him. I glanced up and there he was, standing just beyond the doorway, looking at me not with the usual warmth but with an intensity that was both unsettling and intriguing. "Everything all right?" I asked, brushing off a strange sense of self-consciousness as I met his gaze. He blinked as if breaking free from a trance, and his lips curled into a soft, familiar smile. "Yeah, just... home feels different when you're away at school, you know?" We went about the day without further incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something unspoken lingered between us. That night as I settled into bed, my thoughts drifted to him, his words, his quiet, contemplative looks, and I found myself wondering, was there something more to it, or was I just imagining things? Days turned into weeks, and it was in the small moments that I began to feel it the most. The way he would sit across from me during dinner, his eyes occasionally drifting over my face, lingering a bit too long. Or how he seemed to find excuses to be around me, a subtle shift in his demeanor that felt more attentive than before. I questioned myself endlessly, wondering if maybe this was all in my head. One evening we sat down to watch a movie, something we hadn't done in ages. The house was silent, save for the soft flicker of the TV in the dimly lit room. We had been laughing at some scene when his hand brushed mine. It was such a simple touch, one that should have gone unnoticed, but the warmth of his skin left a small electric spark that startled me. "Sorry," he murmured, pulling his hand away, and I felt a strange pang of loss. He seemed to notice my reaction, his gaze softening as he looked at me. "You seem different," he said, almost hesitantly. I glanced down, hoping to hide my flush. "Oh, I think it's you who's changed," I replied with a laugh, hoping to diffuse the tension. All grown up now, but he just kept watching me, a look that was serious, searching. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just seeing things more clearly." Those words hung in the air, unsettling and magnetic all at once, and for a moment neither of us moved. I could feel a crack in the boundary that had always separated us, a fragile line that suddenly felt dangerously thin. I cleared my throat, abruptly getting up from the couch, brushing off the moment as best as I could. I think I'll get ready for bed. Long day tomorrow." Michael's eyes followed me as I made my way down the hall, and I didn't need to turn around to know he was watching me leave. The next morning, I awoke feeling more unsettled than ever. It was as if that shared moment had cracked open something I wasn't prepared to face, something I hadn't allowed myself to consider. At breakfast, things felt even more tense. Michael sat across from me, unusually quiet, his gaze steady and unreadable. I focused on my coffee, feeling my pulse quicken whenever I felt his eyes drift over me. "I was thinking," he finally spoke, breaking the silence. "Maybe we could spend the day together. Just us." There was something in his tone, soft yet resolute, that made my heart race. It had been so long since we'd had a day just to ourselves, and part of me yearned to recapture that closeness, to ground myself in the role I knew. "Sure," I agreed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just like old times." As we walked through the local park, I felt an overwhelming sense of nostalgia, of bittersweet memories from when he was just a boy. Yet now there was a maturity in him that was unmistakable, a silent strength, a presence that I found disarming. We talked about his classes, his ambitions, his life away from home. I wanted to absorb every detail, to remember these moments before he'd be gone again. We stopped at a clearing, gazing at the lake shimmering under the late afternoon sun, and I felt a sudden, quiet intimacy settle between us. "I've missed this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Being here with you." "I have too," I replied softly, feeling the weight of the words. He turned to face me, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity one hadn't seen before. You know, Mom, you're more to me than just family. You're everything. The words sent a jolt through me. His face was close, too close, and I felt that familiar electric tension crackle between us. I took a deep breath, torn between instinct and the surge of emotions I didn't want to admit to myself. Michael, I started, my voice barely above a whisper, but he placed a hand on my arm, gently but firmly. Don't, he said softly, his eyes earnest, pleading. Don't say anything. I needed you to know, to understand. I felt my defenses crumbling, my heart pounding against my ribs as his words settled over me. The days leading up to my husband's return were tense, heavy with the unresolved energy that Michael and I danced around, each of us too cautious to bring it into the light. I busied myself around the house, cleaned up more than I needed to, rearranged shelves that hadn't been touched in years, anything to keep my mind from spiraling back to that afternoon in the park. When he texted me the night before to confirm his arrival, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. I had missed him, missed the normalcy his presence brought, yet I couldn't ignore the thought gnawing at the back of my mind. How would things feel with Michael after his father returned? That evening I made his favorite dinner, more out of habit than anything else. The house was filled with the scent of roast and garlic, comforting reminders of shared moments over the years. Michael had gone out, saying he had a friend to meet up with, leaving the house eerily quiet as I waited. When the door finally opened, my husband stepped in, suitcase in hand, his familiar smile already in place. He looked worn from travel, but his eyes were warm, grateful as they found me. Home at last, he said, pulling me into a tight hug, breathing me in. You have no idea how much I missed you. I smiled, sinking into the embrace, hoping it would dispel some of the lingering tension I'd felt all week. I missed you too, I replied, my voice sounding soft, almost foreign to my own ears. He leaned down to kiss me, his touch as familiar as the feel of my own skin, but my mind wouldn't settle. I could feel that unspoken tension, still thick in the air, waiting to surface. We sat down to dinner, and he talked animatedly about his meetings, his clients, the whirlwind of the business trip. I laughed in all the right places, asked him questions, and tried my best to stay present, but it was impossible to shake Michael from my mind. Every so often, my gaze drifted toward the front door, wondering if he would walk in and shatter this quiet reunion with his father. It was close to midnight when I finally heard Michael come through the front door. I was just about to head to bed, but something made me pause, waiting at the top of the stairs, listening to his quiet footsteps as he entered the house. He lingered by the doorway, and I sensed he was as reluctant to walk in as I was to face him. As he turned to walk toward his room, his gaze flickered up, and his eyes met mine across the darkened hallway. His face softened, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. In that silent exchange I felt everything, the closeness we shared, the unspoken connection, the confusion that lay heavy between us. And in that moment I knew he felt it too. The next morning, everything felt stilted and subdued. My husband moved through his morning routine, oblivious to the tension that now felt woven into the walls of the house. Over breakfast, Michael was quieter than usual, his gaze fixed on his plate, lost in thoughts I dared not ask about. My husband finally broke the silence, looking between the two of us with a bemused expression. You two are awfully quiet today. I thought you'd have caught up on everything while I was away. Michael's eyes darted to mine before he managed a half-hearted smile. Yeah, just a lot on my mind, I guess. Busy getting ready for exams, I'd imagine, my husband said, clearly trying to bridge the strange quiet with normal small talk. Michael nodded, not looking up, his hand subtly tightening around his coffee mug, and the weight of his silence settled over me like a warning. A few days later, as I folded laundry in our bedroom, my husband walked in, watching me with that concerned look I had come to know so well. Are you okay? He asked, his voice soft, but with a serious undertone that caught my attention. I paused, folding a shirt with a little too much care, forcing a smile. Course. Just adjusting, you know. Michael being back in the house, and you away. He tilted his head, giving me a look that said he knew me too well. He seems different lately. Did something happen while I was gone? I felt my pulse quicken, a surge of anxiety creeping in, and I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. Different how? He shrugged, his brow creasing slightly. I don't know. More reserved. He's usually so open with us. I forced a smile, knowing that the less I said, the better. He's just getting older. They say boys go through these phases. He seemed to accept this, nodding slowly, though I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. We left it at that, but as he turned to leave the room, he paused. I know you two have always been close. Maybe he just needs to reconnect with you, feel that support from you. You've always been the one to bring him back around. I smiled at the suggestion, but the weight of his words lingered long after he'd left the room. He had no idea how close Michael and I had become, nor the boundaries that now felt strained and blurred in ways I didn't know how to manage. That evening, my husband had already retired to bed when I heard a soft knock at my bedroom door. My heart jumped. I knew who it was, and I braced myself as I walked over, opening the door to find Michael standing there. His expression a mix of hesitation and something deeper. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. I glanced over my shoulder, seeing the shadow of my husband fast asleep. "Let's go downstairs," I whispered, slipping out of the room and following Michael into the dimly lit living room. He took a seat on the couch, and I settled beside him, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle of something he couldn't quite articulate. Finally, he broke the silence. I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "I don't know how to act like everything is normal when it doesn't feel that way." I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to tell him that we could go back, that things would settle in time, but deep down I knew we were past that. "Michael. This is hard for me too," I murmured, choosing my words carefully. "But we have to be careful, for everyone's sake." He nodded, but I could see the hurt in his expression, the conflict still raging within him. "I know, but I don't know how to stop feeling this way. And I don't think you do either." A tremor ran through me at his words, the intensity of his gaze grounding me to the spot. He reached out, his hand covering mine in a familiar warmth that felt both comforting and dangerous. My heart raced, my mind caught between the comfort of his touch and the knowledge of the line we had come so close to crossing. "Michael," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We can't. It's too risky. We both have to be stronger than this." He nodded slowly, though his gaze didn't waver. "No, I need you to know that I'll always feel this way. Even if nothing ever changes between us." My heart ached at the honesty in his words, the vulnerability that had bound us so closely, so irrevocably. In the dim light, our hands still entwined, I felt the weight of our connection settle over me, a quiet acceptance that though we couldn't have this, it would forever be a part of us. The room was bathed in a quiet stillness, and time itself seemed to pause as Michael's hand began to trace a line down my arm, so softly it was barely a touch at all. His words were a whisper, filled with a yearning that I could both understand and feel deeply within myself. His fingertips lingered, a gentle caress that sent warmth through my skin. His gaze fixed on me with an intensity that left me breathless. "I've loved you for as long as I can remember," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, each word measured, as if he wanted to savor every syllable. "I never wanted anyone the way I want you." My mind raced, caught between the overwhelming sense of closeness that filled the room and the knowledge that this was a line we could never truly cross. My heart pounded as I felt myself pulled into his presence, the energy between us alive and fragile, crackling like a spark about to ignite. I wanted nothing more than to stop this moment in time, to remain here with him in this perfect, impossible instant where no one else existed. But reality crept in, a quiet voice in the back of my mind, a reminder of the consequences that loomed like shadows just beyond the warm, delicate light between us. I could feel it growing, pressing down on me, yet it was nearly drowned by the intensity of his gaze, the sheer depth of feeling that seemed to reach out and envelop me. "Michael," I whispered, my voice trembling, a mixture of resolve and sorrow heavy in the words. "You know we can't." His eyes softened, and I could see the conflict, the pain of unspoken wishes behind them. He didn't let go, his hand finding mine, holding it with a tenderness that made it nearly impossible to resist. The weight of his words lingered in the air, and a silent understanding passed between us, a mutual acknowledgement of what we wanted but could never have. "I know it's wrong," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "but being with you, even just like this, it's all I've ever dreamed of." I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes. He had opened his heart, made himself vulnerable, and though my own feelings echoed his, I knew we had to stop. This connection, this closeness, was ours, a love that would remain hidden and precious, never to be fully realized. I reached up, letting my hand graze his face, a gesture that held everything we couldn't say. "You'll always be a part of me, Michael," I whispered, my heart breaking with each word. "But we can't keep this going. For your sake, for mine. We have to let go." In that moment, his arms tightened around me, and I held on to him, letting our unspoken emotions find peace in the quiet embrace. It was as if the world had fallen away, leaving just the two of us, holding each other in the sanctuary of a love that, while real, would forever be out of reach. After a long, silent moment, he released me, his hand lingering as if reluctant to let go. "I'll never forget this," he whispered, his voice filled with a tenderness that would echo in my heart for years to come. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and as he finally stepped away, I knew that though we could never fully be together, the memory of this night would live on between us, a bittersweet reminder of a love both beautiful and impossible.